Hello and welcome back. It is Thursday. It is 2 p.m. Eastern time, and that means it is time to have a conversation about the future of teaching and learning. I have a couple comfort notes for you, as always. This session is live on Facebook and YouTube, and it will be posted after we have our wonderful conversation today on the Remake Learning YouTube channel. You can use Twitter and Facebook to comment and ask us questions. We will be answering as time allows. And I hope that you'll visit remakelearning.org/join to review the network norms and values. As per usual, we're not going through them here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ani Martinez. I'm the field director for the Remake Learning Network here in Southwestern Pennsylvania and North Central West Virginia. This conversation is brought to you by Tomorrow, a campaign powered by Remake Learning. For those unfamiliar with our work, Remake Learning is a network, and our focus is on that beautiful intersection between the future of technological change and the future of social change. We work tirelessly to ignite more engaging, more relevant, and more equitable learning practices today and tomorrow. We know that there is no way any single organization alone can transform teaching and learning, and so Remake Learning simply works to bring them all together. Tomorrow is a campaign which promises us a future where we can put into place promising practices for all learners, where we can stay grounded in the things that are timeless, and where we can really meet educators, children, youth, and families where they are and able to flourish in a future of unknown possibilities. We hope you'll join us as we explore tomorrow, now through October 20th, through stories, through grants, more events coming up in October, and of course, weekly conversations and social media engagements every single day as we explore the future of learning through the timeless sensibilities of Fred Rogers. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our info@remakelearning.org. And so now it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the chat Natalie, Nixon, and Suzanne Walsh.
Hi, Ani.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. How are you?
Great. Awesome.
Tuning in from across the country. Yes. I'm so grateful that you were able to schedule us in. I know that with back to school, with Wild Wind book touring and speaking engagements, this is a tremendous honor to have you with us. I would love, as always, I allow my guests to introduce yourself. So Natalie, since you are into my direct field of vision, I'd like to pass the mic over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ani. Hi, Suzanne. It's good to be here. So I'm Natalie Nixon. I am a creativity strategist and the president of Figure 8 Thinking. I'm based in the other P city in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm based in Philly. I'm actually wearing my Philly t-shirt today. And as a creativity strategist, I advise leaders on how to apply creativity and foresight in order to achieve transformational business results. I think that there is a direct, bold line between creativity and impact, not a soft, fuzzy, dotted line. I have a really loopy background in anthropology and fashion. And before I became a full-time entrepreneur and president of Figure 8 Thinking, I was a professor for 16 years. And as Ani alluded to, I've just written and published a new book called The Creativity Leap. Really happy to be here.
Thank you. Happy to have you here. And Suzanne?
Oh, yes. So great to be here. Thank you so much. Hey, Pittsburgh, Southwestern PA. I was very excited to see all of you again. Suzanne Walsh. I am the 19th president of Bennet College, which is one of two historically Black colleges for women in the U.S. And my tie to Pittsburgh is I used to work at the Heinz Endowments. Hey, Heinz Endowments. Many, many years ago. That's when I got my start in philanthropy. So just delighted to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. And so as we have discussed and as we have been discussing every single week, we are really exploring an interesting moment in terms of teaching and learning. And I know that a lot of us have been dealing with a lot of fear and a lot of grief, but I was really curious to ask you both what has been most top of mind in the field for you as we start to get into the realities of really going back to school.
I'll let Suzanne go first because I know you've just been in the midst of starting up again.
Yeah, so thank you. This week, we are welcoming back our faculty and our staff. So we've had 3 days of Faculty and Staff Institute. Next week, we welcome our students back. And so top of mind, it's a lot of great energy at Bennett. I mean, we're virtual. We were the first institution in North Carolina to announce that we would be completely virtual. And I think there's only 6 of us in North Carolina right now. We were also one of the first in the US to announce. And so the faculty, what that meant was the faculty could spend time preparing to teach in a virtual manner. So I've been really excited for the energy that has been coming through virtually this week. With faculty and staff who've had to revamp the way they operate, whether it's in the classroom or on campus. Just been really excited about that. So what's top of mind is the great energy from faculty and staff, just because I literally just left them to come here.
I love that.
Yeah, and for me, I would say, while I don't work directly in education anymore, I'm a stepmom and I have an amazing stepdaughter named Sydney, who is about to start her sophomore year of college. And to Suzanne's point, up until 3 days ago, we all thought she's a student at the University of Pennsylvania, and we all thought that classes were going to be on campus. And just a couple of days ago, an email came out announcing that, in fact, Penn will be going online virtually. So for me, this word buoyant and remaining buoyant is pretty top of mind. There's a balancing act that so many of us are having to navigate, and the type of choices that institutions are needing to make at a drop of a dime right now. You know, just Sydney's own situation going through sophomore year is an example of that. So remaining buoyant, I think, is top of mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm sure that there are great lessons that we can learn in terms of being nimble and adaptable in our systems. And some of these things you really talk about in how we manage our own selves and our own sense of productivity in your book. I would love if you would share a little bit about that and about the book itself.
Sure. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your platform so that I can spread the ideas in the Creativity Leap. The book, The Creativity Leap, is really about why and how creativity is a competency, an essential competency that we must have right now in what we're calling the fourth industrial revolution, as well as in the future of work. Even really renowned institutions such as the World Economic Forum have identified creativity as being within the top 3 job skills that will be required for 2020 and beyond. And the World Economic Forum started projecting that back in 2015, so 5 years ago. That's one of those signals on the landscape that I often talk about. So my book is an attempt to democratize and make more accessible creativity, because there are a couple of reasons why I wrote the book. One, I was really tired of hearing some clients say things like, "Oh, I'm not a creative type," or other people saying, "I am a creative." or the creatives. And one of the foundational principles in my work is that to be human is to be hardwired to be creative. It's just a matter of whether or not you're exercising your creativity. And I define creativity as our ability and capacity to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. The second big reason I decided to write the book was I'm a global keynote speaker. And I'd say for the past 2 years, especially after I would finish giving a talk, and in fact, a lot of the way I use my speaking is to prototype ideas. And I have been tinkering with a lot of the ideas in this book for at least 3 years. I would finish giving a talk and some people will come up to me afterwards and say, hey, that was a really great talk. Where can I read more about this? And I might be able to point them to my ink column, which has some bits and of what I've written about. But I realized that I wanted to have a centralized place where I could, as I like to say, productize my intellectual capital. So now, ta-da, here it is, all in one nice, neat package. A lot of the ideas that have been floating and rumbling through my head around why we have to get on the ball, and especially when technology is ubiquitous, really exercise and develop and cultivate creativity.
And so much of that is applicable to our teaching practices, right? And the way that we see teachers who are best able to engage really deeply with their students are the ones that do seem to have that deep connection to a student's imagination and their own processes, as multimodal as they do, as we encroach into a hyper-personalization model for teaching and learning. I think that those processes and that toggling method is going to become more and more the norm. Suzanne, do you think that you see that in spaces in higher education now, or do you see ways that promise could unfurl?
I think there's work to be done. I think that there are folks for whom this sounds really natural and feels very natural. And when her book first came out, I was doing a performance review with one of my team members, and the way that this person talked about their work and how they approached it, I said, "Oh my gosh, you have to read The Creativity Leap." And the next week, the person showed it to me on screen, I bought it. You're exactly right. So I think that the work really resonates with some folks who are ready but didn't have a vocabulary and didn't have a practice to go into it. So on the one hand, I think there's this great opportunity, just as Natalie said, to be able to identify and give people frameworks. And then there are folks for whom they automatically self-select out of the conversation because, as Natalie said, people don't see themselves as creative. So it's trying to bring out in everybody that they actually have this natural skill set. In my State of the College remarks that I gave on Tuesday, I talked about for the year, what are my expectations in terms of behaviors and competencies and sort of vibe for the year. And there were a couple of things that are really important to me, and they go along with this idea of the creativity leap. One of those was, I expect that if you are a member of the faculty or the staff at Bennett College at this moment in time, you will bring an entrepreneurial spirit. You will bring an entrepreneurial attitude. The other competency to me that is really critical, and I think, Natalie, you talk about this in your book, if I'm remembering correctly, is improvisation. You have to be able to improvise. So for me, I wouldn't necessarily say toggle. I talk about improvisation, because whatever is thrown at you, you have to be able to do, the yes and. And so those are two fundamental competencies, skills, like orientation, vibe, that I expect all faculty and staff to bring. And quite frankly, students are going to have to bring that as well, because during this time, which last fall of 2019, I referred originally to our time in the world as VUCA, meaning volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I came in last fall talking about that, or as one of our faculty members likes to say, she came down here hollering about VUCA. And so, and so last fall and last spring, faculty and staff and students roll their eyes. Oh God, is she talking about VUCA again? That was in the fall. In the spring, when COVID hit, faculty would like yell to me, or staff would yell to me across the campus. They call me Prez, and they're like, Prez, VUCA, right? And so I say that because the only way one survives VUCA is to be able to be entrepreneurial, to be able to improvise. And you have to be, underneath it, I have two other things that sort of relate to all of that. You have to be healthy and you have to be anti-fragile. So you have to have like done your, ooh, I hit my mic. You have to be able to like done your stretches, you know, really making sure you're staying hydrated and all of that, because that will help you navigate. All of those various skill sets and competencies are what are important for teachers, whether it's K-12 or faculty in higher education. And I go to that because I think too often the conversations about what's happening in school are all about like what technology or what testing. Those are the last conversations. We want to talk, I think, increasingly about who are we when we show up to work? Who do we want to be? What is that vibe and that set of skills that I'm bringing? How does that translate to students? Because all the stuff we bring, students pick up on that energy.
Absolutely. It's so strange that you bring up VUCA. I was just introduced to this concept a week or so ago. I'm a current Upswell Fellow for independent sector, and we had one of our cohort trainings, and facilitator Gibran Rivera, he workshopped us with this idea of VUCA. And it's funny how these things start to repeat once they enter your field, right?
But it's an old, I mean, Natalie can talk about that. You're right. It's such an old concept. And when faculty asked me, our faculty senate president had asked me like, well, where did you get this idea? I said, it's like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old idea from Harvard Business Review. But when I arrived, I didn't have another way of describing what I saw going on in the world and what I saw going on at Bennett College. And it just like came back into my brain from, I don't know how long ago, Natalie, forever ago, right?
For a really long time. And actually, the acronym or mnemonic of VUCA comes from the U.S. military.
Exactly.
So when we first entered Afghanistan, the terrain was understandably volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Actually, right down the road from Philly, between Philly and Pittsburgh and Carlisle, PA, at the U.S. Army College.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, that's really where the name was crafted. And then, as what often happens, things from the military find their way into corporate America, and it became a more business speak. But yeah, it has been around for a minute.
Sorry, I got distracted by a feature that I accidentally clicked. I'm sorry. That is fascinating. There's like a big book in my family's home too. That's like everyday expressions that have come from the military. So yet another hidden system that finds its way into our vernacular.
And actually, it's quite interesting. Design thinking was first really being exercised in the U.S. military, or in a lot of different military systems, even before it made its way into academia and then into practice. When you think about it, military leaders and what they're teaching is an adaptive mindset, an ability to be incredibly improvisational, and a lot of the principles that design thinking really leads with, the ability to be empathic and prototype and use lateral thinking, are skill sets or tactics that are really important to win any kind of negotiation and strategic engagement, which is a nice way maybe of saying war, but it's really important. So yeah, design thinking actually was first started in the military. Played around with quite a bit there.
We could go on and on about these military connections, because also when I was in Pittsburgh, one of my colleagues, Jerry Balbier, who was then a program officer at the Heinz Endowments, he funded like a tutoring app for mathematics that started out originally in the military. The technology was developed in the military originally. So it's kind of an interesting, there are so many lessons that are not, as Natalie said, they're not about war, but they're actually things that can be used in real life to be able to help us, I think, move through situations that are complex, that are ambiguous. And so I think part of what I love about Creativity Leap and the work that Natalie does and design thinking is it draws from multiple disciplines. So in order for us to improve in education, we shouldn't just be looking at education. We should look afield, far afield, and we can look at the military and we can adapt ideas from that area.
Absolutely.
I wanted to build on something that Suzanne said earlier around just in terms of one of her tenets being improvisation and being able to work improvisationally. Before I was a university professor, and I have a loopy background in anthropology and fashion, but there was a 5-year chapter of my life when I was a middle school and high school English teacher. And I jokingly say that being a middle school English teacher is probably the best preparation by far for anything I have gone on to do for a number of reasons, which maybe we'll get into later. But what I do know to be true about teaching, and so now I have over 20 years experience as an educator, is that teaching is an incredibly creative act. I think sometimes we can get bogged down by all of the other sorts of metrics that are and evaluations, standardizations that sometimes feel like they're being imposed into what could sometimes be a bit more of an organic process. But what teachers have to do is it's a bit performative. It's incredibly improvisational. To be an outstanding teacher, you must love learning because you have to be super user student centered in order to make sure that what information you're trying to bestow really gets converted into knowledge and hopefully actionable knowledge. So in all of my experiences of being in the classroom from middle school age up through graduate school level as a instructor, teaching is an incredible act. And improvisation, and the way I have been using and understanding improvisation, it's one of the ways we can exercise creativity. So in the Creativity Leap, I share this 3I creativity model. It's a model for creativity where I realized it wouldn't be quite enough to just stop at saying, okay, guys, creativity is about toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. Okay. And how do we make sure we do that and exercise it? Well, in my view, we can exercise creativity through the 3Is, which are inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. And inquiry is ask a better friggin' question, right? Ask a different question, have different people around the table so that new and different questions will be asked. All teachers who might be tuning in and also anyone who's ever been a student, a learner, all of us know those moments when a teacher will ask, so are there any questions? And you hate those moments as a teacher. But what's happened is we have not made the leap, as Warren Berger, the author of A More Beautiful Question, likes to say, of understanding that asking questions is a way of thinking. Yeah, it might reveal that you're ignorant about a subject, but so what? Like that requires some humility to go beyond that. So when we have the insatiable curiosity, that's actually the root of empathy. In design thinking, we talk about empathy. Before you can empathize with someone, you have to be curious about them. Why do they sit over there and not over here? Why do they do it this way and not that way, right? We have to first ask, and then that builds the empathy. Improvisation is the second piece of the 3I model, and improv is not about doing a fabulous jazz riff solo. Improvisation is about your ability to be adaptive and emergent and self-organizing, as Suzanne has already pointed out, saying yes and not yeah, but we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work, right? And then intuition is a type of pattern recognition. That's how I define intuition. Sometimes I call intuition brain feelings. It's that nudge that is a sonar and a radar and a muscle. And the more we use and listen to our intuition, the stronger and clearer it gets. The more we ignore our intuition, the flabbier and dimmer it gets. And I interviewed over 50 people for the Creativity Leap, and I remember at the beginning of an interview with the CEO of Vectorworks. He's a PhD in engineering. And I thought, oh boy, when I start to talk to him about intuition, he's probably going to just laugh me out this room. And he totally leaned in. So successful leaders absolutely pay attention to their intuition in order to get to better and clearer decision making. But I just wanted to just kind of build on that point about improvisation. In my view, it's an essential way to exercise creativity.
And I think if you're a teacher trying to think about how do you help students with that inquiry, with that first eye, there's a great resource. I think they're housed at Harvard, but they're called the Right Question Institute, RIGHT questions.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that the way that they help students to ask better questions, there's a real process. There is actually an art to it. And so that you don't have that moment that Natalie was talking about where you're smiling in front of the room, waiting, but really helping to understand how to build that, because it's a different skill. It's a completely different skill set than most folks have developed over time.
I love that. And I love the idea of being in a classroom and exercising something like abstraction laddering with children. And you could scaffold that to really any age group because it makes such intuitive sense. I mean, one of our first questions is why, right?
That's right.
Right.
We're really good at asking questions as little people, as children. That's how we navigate this world. That's how we figure stuff out, is by asking questions. So it's really almost criminal that in some of our organizational cultures, it's like punitive if you exhibit curiosity.
You could say that again for the kids and the folks in the back. Like, say it louder.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. And like it's curious to see how critical thought and curiosity is often criminalized in some of our institutions like schools. And I love schools, but these are realities that we confront, and I wonder why that does feel so dangerous to us.
I love that you just said, I wonder. All good stuff follows the phrase, I wonder why, I wonder if. Yeah, wonder is really important.
It is. It's a portal. And so you talk and you articulate so well about this method and about this practice and this skill building and cultivating it. But one thing that I admire so much about your work, Natalie, is that you've also really developed this very articulated and clear brand and identity. You've also created this platform on your website where you're in active conversation and in active relationship with a lot of people. I would love to hear your thoughts from both of you. Like, what would brand cultivation look like in a classroom? What would platform creation look like in that space?
Oh, I love that question. I used to, when I was a professor, the last 6 years of my academic career, I created and launched with colleagues the Strategic Design MBA program at Philadelphia University. And I taught primarily 2 courses in that program. We had a co-teaching model, which I loved. One was a business model innovation course, and the other was a style and brand. It was called Style and Brand Strategy. And one of the principal tenets of the branding course was, number one, that brand is not an add-on. It's not like slap some lipstick on it or, a logo, right? Brand is a tool for strategy. And the second big principle of the course is that brand is story. And we actually, I got my MBA students to indulge with me a bit in some Bourdieu and some Claude Lévi-Strauss, and just to understand
critical theory, kids in the house.
Critical theory and semiotics and all that good stuff, to really understand unpack what you're seeing here, right? What you're hearing, the platforms that are being used. And so what's interesting now, all great brand strategists today realize that it's not a push type of delivery. We're pushing our message on to the consumer, onto people. And pulling is a little scary. Pulling is when all of a sudden, those pop-up ads show on a browser that you're looking at because you just did a search recently. That's just pulling data. But it's really about conversation. It's push-pull. So I think a brand development in a classroom would be co-created. It would be around the story that the students and the teacher are telling about, I think kind of in a metacognitive sense, what they think about what they're learning as it relates to, I don't know, geometry or history or literature, and then really being used as a way to shape and model and reflect back out what an element and part of the school experience is. That's one thought I have about branding and classrooms and education.
Oh, that's so good. I was trying to think about this because we talked a little bit about this again at our Faculty and Staff Institute, and one of the reflection questions I had for faculty and staff was, what is one thing that you're really proud of from last year that represents the brand of your department, of your area? Because for me, it was as much about like, I don't always know what the brand is that they're trying to project, because we haven't had those conversations yet. They're conversations to come. But I think that being intentional and clear that really everything one does, it's all of your behaviors that are part of your brand. So it's as much about being intentional about having a brand, but it's also thinking really clearly about, well, hopefully everything that I'm doing, everything that I'm saying reinforces the brand, because there's nothing like a brand disconnect. And I think brand disconnect comes, especially like in a higher ed situation, where you see like all the beautiful, like view book and the website, for a college, and the student arrives on campus and then their experience doesn't live up to that brand. It doesn't live up to what the institution was projecting in the visuals or in the recruiting. And so there's something there to be understood and to be reinforced that everything is about the brand. And but it has to be an authentic brand. It can't be a brand that, as Natalie was saying, that's just like some lipstick on a pig or a cow or whatever you put the lipstick on in that analogy, or that metaphor. But thinking about, I think, just thinking about all aspects of what it means to have that brand, and the brand being true to yourself or being true to the institution, people feel it. And when students are saying, we want something authentic, that's what they mean. They mean they can tell the difference between the glossiness and then what happens on campus. And I think it's the same in K-12. A school or, a teacher can project one thing in one setting, but in another setting, maybe they're projecting something else. And that is when it's difficult for students to learn, because they're spending so much time saying, well, I don't know what to believe. They may not be saying that out loud, but they're trying to make sense of this disconnect between the brand that they saw and the brand that they're experiencing. So I think there's work for all of us to do, because in education, we haven't thought much about it other than at a holistic, like as a field, we haven't thought as much about it other than the fanciness of the website.
Mm-hmm. And think about our students today, especially those in K through 12, where they have been growing up with the agency and access to platforms for their own brand creation. Yes. So, and part of brand creation in the era of social media is like the grittier and more authentic, the better, the rawer, don't bleep it out, don't over edit it. That's really what they have been accustomed to seeing, not to mention so much more DIY. And how interesting is it that in the midst of education and the whole entire spectrum of education, in the past 10 years, well, maybe 20 years, definitely 10 years, is coming up against a lot of disruptors that heck, I mean, one of higher ed's biggest competitors is YouTube. I mean, you can learn so much. You can learn trig on YouTube. You can tune into TED Talks, right? So we're now interacting with people who have been able to access a very different model of brand creation that is not ta-da kitchen show, right? Branding, which is a bit more of what I definitely grew up on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much easier to identify with YouTube as a young person. It's so much easier to navigate, right? We talk about platforms, and if we're talking about school as platforms, by the way, I'm taking so many notes. But if we're talking about schools as a platform, and then we hear from kids time and again, like, I can't navigate this space, then they're definitely going to go to these platforms that are much more navigable and that they see themselves in, right? And that's something that, again, like taking it back into your practices, like your history and your story, I think that's why your brand is so compelling, because you articulate it like right up front in the beginning of the book, like, this is my life, and then that was my life, and then I lived this whole other life, right? It's something that I think it makes it very clear how adaptation and transformation are part of this process as well.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I thought it would be important to integrate personal stories into my own personal revelations about creativity, what it is, what it isn't, how I relate to it, how I express myself and have expressed myself creatively, who I learned from. Those personal stories matter, and frankly, those are the type of texts and reading that I tend to enjoy when people share a bit more personally. So I decided to do it as well.
Well, if we really want to get into the things that are timeless, right? Because that's another big part of the Tomorrow campaign, is that you just said something so important, which is being seen, right? And a good teacher, a good leader, teachers are leaders, right? Teachers are designers. Like, those are the ones that allow their people to see them in a real way. And that is very scary business. And I don't think that teachers are necessarily trained classically to be seen. Right?
No.
I don't know how you feel about that.
So I want to make sure so are you saying teachers are not trained to be seen or to see? Could you say?
Oh, that's an even juicier question, actually. We're getting provocative.
I think back to Natalie's 3 I's, I think that the best teacher, professor practices those 3 I's all the time. And with that comes the ability to both see students, and actually the best educators are seeing the possibility in students. It's not just seeing the students. Like, that to me, I think almost every teacher or faculty member literally sees their students. The power is seeing the possibility. The power is drawing out that possibility. And I think you get there by practicing those 3 I's with your students. You get there by helping them through inquiry. And you're probably practicing appreciative inquiry sort of on them, with them, to draw that out. There's improvisation in that classroom that, again, draws out the best of the student, but also allows the student to see you in a different way. Because if you just get up and you read from your slides, no one's going to see you. They're going to see the slides and they'll probably be asleep. And then in terms of intuition, the intuition of that person in that educator leadership role to say, I can see something in you that you have not yet seen for yourself, and to push that student to say, oh my gosh, to get over the fear and to like come in, use your own intuition, like, ooh, I'm terrified, but okay, I'm going to make that creative leap, to bring it back to Natalie's book. So, I think it's a two-way seeing, but Right now, I'm really nervous about the expression about where people say, I see you and I hear you, because it's almost become a platitude with nothing behind it. Because to be seen, like, I know what people intend, but it's starting to lose meaning. When I say see, I want people to see deeply and to listen deeply. Back to design thinking, you've got to bring that empathy in both directions. So I don't really know what your question was, but those are my thoughts on something that just came to me.
You answered that question, and then you like took it and alley-ooped it, and then like you broke the hoop. You broke the hoop on that one.
I don't even really understand sports analogies, but I think I got that one.
What do I know about? Do I look like I play basketball? No.
I heard that I broke something, and that just seemed appropriate. Yes.
Yeah, that's like thumbs up. Yeah. Yes, right on. And but again, going back to this cultivation of the story, this push-pull conversation, right? Like in the times that we're living in, like what does that look like in a learning environment? I don't have an answer to that. Maybe it's not answerable for the folks on this conversation, right?
Well, you know, some of what I say somewhat sarcastically, but really, you know, pay attention to what people say when they're drunk and when they're joking. But I like to say that we show up to work in drag. It's like Natalie's greatest hits, best of, like we don't really feel too comfortable to show each other our most vulnerable selves. For example, I was on the phone yesterday with a friend colleague who is at Salesforce, and in the tech space at Salesforce. Well, I guess most of it's all tech at Salesforce. You know, he serves as a mentor, and a colleague he was talking to just broke down, just with kind of the despair this colleague has been feeling during this time of COVID. And my friend was saying how it was awkward at first. And we were just talking through how it's awkward because we typically are in drag and we don't really show the full spectrum of who we really are, even that kind of more lighthearted, goofy self or that despairing self. And so what happens when we show up to work in drag is that we don't allow people to be more deeply curious about us, and we don't get to be more curious about others. So for example, I was a professor at Philadelphia University for 16 years, and in year 15, we were going through one of the many accreditation processes that a university must go through. And there was a whole section on diversity, basically. And the entire time I was at the university, I was either only one of 2 or one of 3 full-time Black faculty at the university. So I wasn't counting adjunct faculty, not counting visiting lecturers, but full-time, where you get to vote on curricula, on hiring, and tenure, and on student life and those sorts of things. And so we were having a meeting where the visiting accreditor was kind of asking this group who was, and of course I was asked to be on the diversity group because I was like one of 2 or 3 people, Black faculty there. And I'm just sitting quietly in the room. And at one point, the visiting accreditors asked, if I were to stop someone on the pathway of this beautiful campus and ask them, what's the state of diversity here at Philadelphia University? What do you think they would say to me? And the whole room was quiet. It was like a terrifying question for a lot of my colleagues, and no one was saying anything. And so finally I spoke up and I said, well, I think what they would tell you is that everything's great. I said, but I think what's more interesting about your question is that in the entire 15 years that I've been a professor here, no one has ever asked me, what is it like to be a Black woman professor here? What is it like when you go through the mommy bitch syndrome in your course evaluations, right? I happen to be a professional where when I give feedback, I might not be smiling. I give it to you straight, and that gets coded as mean or as bitch. Sorry, I hope I can say that on this podcast. And a white male colleague who's confident and smart gets coded very differently than a person like myself. I'm confident and I'm smart, and it gets coded as in a more threatening way, which has this whole cascading effect about my professional pathway, my experience with my colleagues, the tacit and implicit stressors that I go through throughout the day in the classroom, in the hallway, et cetera, et cetera. So I say this out loud, and it was good for my colleagues to hear it. There was a whole other series of things that happened after that. But the point is, be curious about what it is to be your specific identity in this context, in this situation. It matters. It's not something to shirk away from or to run away from. It's a really valid conversation. When we are allowed to show up more fully human in our work environments, productivity increases. When productivity and well-being and happiness increases, often efficiencies improve. When efficiencies increase, costs go down. That's an example of that solid, bold line I referenced at the top of our hour about between creativity and impact, business impact specifically. So it's really important that leadership invite people to not show up to work in drag, partly by modeling it, right? Partly by not only doing their greatest hits, but kind of being vulnerable in different ways themselves.
Yes. And I think that is hardest for people who aren't of the global majority. Like, I think that people who have white heteronormative identities really struggle with that often because of these myths and cultural practices around professionalism, right? Like that's a big one that we see, and they're not paid to be here and feel. They're paid to do their job and to labor in that very industrialized model. And you mentioned forecasting, and you mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. Well, one of the possible futures that I really believe in is that the future of work is increasingly human. And as that happens, like, we're going to have to come to this reskilling and this reckoning with how to be in community in our work practices. And that's probably really scary for a lot of people, teachers included, right?
Yes.
Being more human in our school environments. So we have 10 more minutes. You're good, right, Natalie? We have 10 more minutes. And so the last question that I always ask, and we always ask every single week, is really about vision and about possible futures. And so when you think about your preferred future, what is your vision for the future of teaching and learning?
I think that we focus first on learning and reminding ourselves. So it's sort of like going back to go forward, reminding ourselves what is learning. Why do we want people to learn? You know, one of the things that has been really interesting about this whole coronavirus situation, and when people are attacking the education system, whether it be K-12 or higher education, what's happened is people have conflated the notion of learning and education. Those are not actually the same thing. And they've conflated learning, education, and a building or a campus. So everybody's saying, well, we're failing because students, whether they be K-12 or higher ed, are not in a location. They're not in a building. They're not on a campus. But that's just the container. That's just the place where education has happened because of some learning. And so if we really go all the way back and say, well, what is learning? Then learning can happen anywhere. And learning should happen anywhere. And so for me, a reclaiming of learning, a reclaiming of the world is actually our classroom. That this is a place for wonder, as Natalie talks about, a place for curiosity, a place for us to experiment, taking the best elements of the best homeschoolers and homeschooling programs, because they use what's around them, I think actually takes us in a really different direction. If we think for years, probably almost 20 years, I've had this idea that I really wanted cities to be seen as a learning environment. And so I had this whole notion I wanted to do this program called University. So, university spelled with city at the end, because I wanted every experience that someone had out in the community, whether you're going to a museum when we were able to do that, whether you were just walking down the street and there may be a historical marker or whatever it is, but using the environment, looking at the trees, listening to the birds, whatever was around you should be a source, again, of wonder. And if there were ways of actually then documenting what you were learning or demonstrating what you were learning, I just thought like, that's my ideal. My ideal of the world is that everything around us is seen as a learning environment. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if coronavirus or the next, horrible pandemic comes, we're going to be okay, because we all have the ability to learn no matter where we are. We all will have access to whatever is around us. And so that's really, for me, the future. Then you can add on, where does technology help? Where does technology give it a boost? But even though I love tech and I'm in a bunch of betas, I still go to tech last. I'm really more interested in, let's focus on learning and let's focus on the world around us, because that curiosity is absolutely essential in order for us to continue to thrive and survive as human beings, and, let alone sort of the globe.
I think that's beautiful. And I think that is also where networks and, again, platforms become so critical and key. And you think about initiatives like Cities of Learning, that was in Pittsburgh, that was in Toronto, that was in Austin, right? And ultimately we saw the burnout happen because of the failures of the technology. It's so interesting to me. But couldn't agree more.
We forget that tech is fundamentally, it's a tool. So this pen, this is technology, right? And we've really mystified it and romanticized. I love that, Suzanne, especially the emphasis on learning. Absolutely agree.
And so what about you, Natalie? What's your preferred future?
Well, it's definitely a future where we're not showing up in drag anymore. It's a future where we are, have really, as much as we have mystified creativity to the extent that we have ghettoized it in the arts, which is not fair to artists and it's not beneficial to our society at large. We've also mystified the rationale and what's rational, right? As if that is the end all be all. And even the most brilliant minds and what we would consider rational spaces, like Albert Einstein, like Steve Jobs, totally embraced and revered the intuitive and that which cannot be explained. So a future that I hope for is one where we really are leading with creativity in all the ways that I like to define it, as imbued with wonder and rigor, and really understanding that wonder is not superfluous. Wonder is not a luxury. And rigor is not rigidity, right? That's also kind of a misnomer. Rigor, so many of my clients, when I first start working with them, I realized that they think they have rigor down, but they're running from meeting to meeting. They're sticking to the rule book. They have procedure, but we've got to shift from, for example, from the rule book to the playbook, right? So just having a fluency and with creativity so that we actually optimize being human. I mean, I believe that we are here to be creative, and it shows up in all sorts of ways depending what our gifts and our talents and skills and interests are. And I absolutely do not believe that creativity is a luxury. I've been writing about and saying in the past 4 months since COVID-19 broke, and then the tragic, very visible murder of George Floyd, that days of uncertainty and ambiguity are designed for creativity. While it may feel counterintuitive, that, you know, some folks may be feeling like, oh, we've got to dig into the practical stuff. Well, guess what? Creativity is the practical stuff. Creativity is the only way that we're going to see ourselves out of these wicked problems, wicked in the kind of systems design way of thinking about it. So my hope is that we really embrace and exercise creativity in its fullest sense on a consistent basis.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And finding the complementary creativity of others in these moments too, which we're really starting to see across sectors. It's been quite moving, I think, in interesting ways. Well, in all of that, I want to say thank you and honor the many yous that make you both. The fact that you were willing to share this hour with our network and through our platforms is very humbling, and I'm very grateful that we were able to be connected in this way, and that, you know, sharing the knowledge in your book, like mine is all marked up now. So thank you for that knowledge as well. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I hope that everyone listening and everyone that will listen to this also learns to embrace their creativity. And I hope that it brings them strength and comfort in what has been a very challenging and griefful 2020. But my deepest gratitude. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, it was so fun. And also just a quick plug and thank you to our technical crew, Dave and Pete from Alone Together, PGH. Please check them out every Wednesday through Friday for all of the Yinzers at heart here and abroad. It's a great place to find comfort and some laughs. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to have us sign off, and I will see our audience next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Bye now. Thank you.
Bye.